Nozomi Momoi was born in Tokyo in 1978 and rose to fame in Japan's plot-optional film industry during the early 2000s. She became a prolific entertainer in this scene, appearing in over 100 film releases within about a year. By 2002, however, Nozomi was growing tired of the relentless filming schedule and considering a shift to a more traditional acting career. Friends later revealed that she planned to get married, leave the saucy screen circuit, and pursue work as a stage actress. At 24 years old, Nozomi Momoi seemed poised to start a new chapter in life, but that was all about to go disturbingly wrong. On October 12, 2002, while visiting friends in Nagano Prefecture, Nozomi's life met a tragic end. Shortly before 9 p.m. that night, a passerby in the city of Shiojiri spotted a car on fire by a remote riverbank along the Narai River and called emergency services. Firefighters arrived and doused the flames, only to uncover a horrifying scene. 2 bodies were found, one inside the scorched vehicle and one on the ground a short distance away. Despite severe burns on both, authorities soon identified the victims. The woman was Nozomi Momoi, and the man was her companion on the trip, a 24-year-old acquaintance named Hiroki Sakai, who worked at a local car dealership. Evidence indicated that Nozomi had been slain before the fire. An autopsy found she suffered from 6 stab wounds. Her body had then been doused in a flammable liquid and set ablaze, seemingly to destroy evidence of the crime. Hiroki's remains were discovered in the car's back seat, burned so badly that examiners couldn't immediately determine his exact cause of death. Investigators did notice a knife, believed to have been used in the commission of the crime, lying near Hiroki's left hand inside the car, even though he was right-handed. This odd detail hinted that the scene may have been staged. From the start, the scene's strange circumstances puzzled investigators. It was baffling that Nozomi's body lay outside the car while Hiroki's was inside. Initially, police ruled that this was a mutual pact between the couple, ensuring that they would depart the world together. This was how things looked at first glance. Nozomi had been stabbed, and Hiroki appeared to have died in the burning car. As evidence emerged, however, this theory started to crumble quickly. Crucially, the autopsy showed that neither victim had inhaled much smoke, meaning Nozomi and Hiroki were likely dead or unconscious before the fire started. Such findings pointed to the disturbing likelihood of a third-party perp who had slain the couple and then set the car on fire to hide the crime. Investigators quickly tried to piece together what the two had been up to that night. It appeared Nozomi and Hiroki had left his home shortly before the incident, and they departed in a rush. At the residence, officers found the couple's shoes still by the door and a computer left running with the monitor on, as if the two intended to return shortly. These signs suggested they did not plan to disappear or die that evening. Instead, something urgent or unexpected drew them out. Despite all the inconsistencies, the authorities decided to close the investigation, a fact that would prove highly controversial. Hiroki's parents, unconvinced that their son was the perpetrator, urged authorities to continue investigating the case as if they had been slain by an as yet unknown perpetrator. In November 2002, about a month after the deaths, his family filed a formal complaint asserting that a third-party slaying had occurred. By January 2003, prosecutors reclassified the case as an open investigation into the slayings of both individuals rather than a closed case. Despite this significant step, the case stalled out with no apparent leads. With no suspects identified, Hiroki's parents also pursued a civil route to seek some form of justice. They sued Hiroki's life insurance company, which had refused to pay out benefits because of the authorities' original ruling on the case. This lawsuit led to a dramatic turn, and in early 2007, the Nagano District Court issued a landmark ruling. It found that based on the evidence, Nozomi and Hiroki's deaths were likely caused by a third party, and ordered the insurer to pay the benefits. While this didn't directly impact the criminal investigation, the 2007 ruling validated the family's doubts and put added pressure on law enforcement to find the perpetrator. Several inconsistencies in the case supported the theory that an outside assailant was responsible. Nozomi and Hiroki left in the middle of normal activities. They were found shoeless at the scene, and their shoes were later located back at the home they'd left. This may be a controversial take on my part, but in general, people don't voluntarily leave their homes without shoes on. Additionally, that computer in the house was still running, with the monitor on, suggesting they expected to return. Personally, I don't find this quite as compelling, as I often leave my computer on when I plan to go out even for a few hours. Also, if they had intended to end themselves in some sort of pact that night, I highly doubt they were too concerned about their computer or their power bill. Still, the cops and journalists found this to be a very odd fact, so perhaps there's some cultural context I'm not understanding here. Another major factor was the position of the bodies. Nozomi's body was found outside the car, while Hiroki's was inside the vehicle, in the back seat. If Hiroki had been the attacker, I find it odd that he would leave Nozomi outside and then climb back into his car to die in the fire. If it really was a pact, where this couple was to perish together, why wouldn't they just stay in the vehicle together? This hints that the victims were likely placed by another party. The weapon being found near Hiroki's left hand also hints at the possibility of the scene being staged. That said, though, it's possible that he held the item in his offhand after the commission of the crime, and it fell from there during the fire. Alternatively, this odd position may have been the result of him flailing during the fire itself. Further, the fire appears to have been used as a cover-up, which, if the initial hypothesis was correct, there'd be nothing to cover up regardless. Crucially, an accelerant was used to torch the car, yet no gasoline container was recovered at the scene, which to me implies the culprit took it. Coupled with the autopsy finding of almost no smoke in the victim's lungs, this suggests the fire was set after the slayings to cover up the crime. Investigators later discovered that a few months before the incident, Hiroki had lent about 800,000 yen to someone, but the person named on the IOU did not actually exist. At the time, this was about $6,500, a significant sum that this individual may not have been willing or able to pay back. This odd find hints that Hiroki was conned, and it raises the possibility that the meeting on the night of the crime was a setup related to that fake loan. It's possible that the couple were lured out that night and slain as a way to wipe this debt clean, but surprisingly, that's not the darkest theory of this case. One theory that continues to circulate in discussions surrounding Nozomi Momoi is that she may have been targeted specifically because she was seeking a new line of work. Nozomi was actively planning a significant career shift, transitioning from the provocative limelight of late-night cinema into a more mainstream and socially accepted acting sphere. Notably, however, she was still at the height of her career and was generating significant income for those producing her brand of direct-to-video entertainment. This change might have posed a threat or disappointment to certain powerful industry figures who had financial stakes in her career. It's been speculated that by stepping away, Nozomi may have inadvertently disrupted ongoing agreements, or perhaps angered someone who felt betrayed or financially slighted. In an industry known for Yakuza involvement, this clearly isn't out of the realm of possibility. Supporters of this theory point to the strange and staged nature of the crime scene, suggesting it was intended as a stark warning to others who might contemplate similar exits. Others indicate that the scene, with no forensic evidence left behind, suggests that Nozomi and her friend had been taken as part of a professional job. This, of course, would suggest the involvement of organized crime. Hiroki may have been an unwitting patsy, lured to the scene, and positioned to take the fall for Nozomi's carefully staged slaying. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, just plugging Lazy Chill True Crime, which is available on YouTube itself or in audio form as a podcast. Just search up Lazy Chill True Crime wherever you get your podcasts, and you've just unlocked a whole bunch of new content. On a cold January night in 1987, 17-year-old Joe Helt set out with friends in the small town of Ellenville, New York, and was never seen again. Helt was a typical teenager in the Hudson Valley, known for his easygoing nature and love of rock music. He lived with his mother and siblings in Ellenville, a quiet village nestled below the Shawangunk Mountains. On Friday, January 16, 1987, Joe joined dozens of local teens at a popular hangout at the abandoned Mount Cathalia Ski Lodge in the nearby hamlet of Cragsmoor. What began as a night of casual partying would soon turn into one of the region's most enduring mysteries. As the evening wore on at the crumbling ski lodge, Joe Helt spent time mingling with friends. At one point, he got into a heated argument with three acquaintances: 21-year-old J.P. LaForge, 18-year-old Wade Marks, and 16-year-old Kelly Diaz. The conflict grew intense. Witnesses later recalled other partygoers drifting away, fearing the dispute might become physical. Despite this tension, Joe eventually left the party with those same three people he had been in conflict with, climbing into LaForge's Subaru for a late-night drive. The group decided to head up a mountain road toward Sam's Point, an area of Minnewaska State Park known for its icy caves and rugged terrain. In the early morning hours of January 17th, their car became stuck in deep snow along a loop road by Lake Maritanza near the Sam's Point Preserve Gatehouse. The three friends later told police that around 3:30 a.m., Joe grew frustrated by their failed attempts to free the car and declared he would walk home. Ellenville was about 5 miles down the mountain, a long trek on a winter night for Joe, who wasn't wearing proper gear. According to the three friends, Joe set off alone into the darkness while they stayed behind. About 20 minutes later, Wade Marks and Kelly Diaz abandoned the stranded car as well, walking in the same direction to Marks's house roughly 2 miles away. John LaForge told investigators he waited another 10 minutes by himself, before also trudging off to his home about 1.5 miles from the scene. It was below freezing, the middle of the night, and the mountain was silent and dark. All three made it safely back to their respective homes. Joe Helt, however, never made it off the mountain, and he vanished into the frigid wilderness, leaving no trace behind. When Joe failed to show up for work the next evening, his family realized something was wrong. Joe's mother, Lee Ann, had assumed he'd stayed over with friends after the party, but when his employer called saying Joe hadn't arrived for his shift, panic set in. Joe wasn't the sort of teenager who simply wouldn't show up for work. The Ellenville police were notified on January 17th that the teen was missing, and a massive search effort was launched that very night. State police, forest rangers, local police officers, volunteer firefighters, tracking dogs, and even a helicopter crew mobilized to scour the mountainous area. For 6 days they combed the wilderness, focusing on the rocky trails, caves, and wooded ravines near the spot where Joe was last seen. It wasn't long, however, before nature made the search even more difficult. A heavy winter storm swept into the region that weekend, dumping over 2 feet of snow across the area. Blinding blizzards and snowdrifts impeded progress and raised fears that Joe, if lost and injured, couldn't have survived long in the elements. After nearly a week of fruitless effort, with roads becoming impassable, officials had to suspend the active search. When spring arrived and the snow melted, search teams returned to canvass the mountain again, hoping to find any sign of Joe, but nothing ever turned up. In the investigation that followed, police questioned the three friends who were last with Joe. Initially, LaForge, Marks, and Diaz were considered persons of interest, and rumors swirled in the local community about what might have happened on that mountain road. Yet law enforcement could find no hard evidence of foul play. The three young friends claimed Joe simply walked off into the night, and no one reported witnessing any crime. Simply put, there was no proof that any crime whatsoever had even occurred. With no body, no witnesses beyond the three, and no physical clues, Joe's case languished. From early on, there were two leading theories about what happened to Joseph Helt: a tragic accident amid hazardous conditions, or foul play at the hands of the people he was with. The accident hypothesis suggests that Joe, disoriented on a frigid night, may have stumbled into the unforgiving terrain of the region. The landscape atop the Shawangunk Ridge is treacherous, dotted with crevices, caves, and steep cliffs hidden by brush, and in winter, often obscured by snow and ice. A popular idea is that Joe could have slipped into one of the deep ice caves, or fallen from a ledge while trying to find his way home. If he succumbed to hypothermia or an injury in a remote crag before the snowstorm, his body might have been quickly buried by snowfall and hidden from rescuers. It's worth noting that Lake Maritanza, the high-elevation lake near where the car was stuck, was frozen at the time. This raises the possibility that Joe fell through ice, though no evidence ever indicated this. However, a second, more sinister theory has persisted, that Joe Helt met with foul play that night. Suspicion has long swirled around the three companions who were with him in the car. The fact that Joe had argued with LaForge, Marks, and Diaz at the party raised red flags for his family and friends. Some have suggested that conflict could have reignited after they drove off together, leading to a confrontation on the snowy mountain road. That said, ultimately, there's nothing to support this scenario, and it remains entirely speculative. On a chilly March night in 1923, a Buick coupe sat abandoned on a downtown St. Louis street corner. Its engine was cold and its driver missing. Police towed it with little fanfare, until they learned the car belonged to a Catholic priest from Illinois who had vanished. The disappearance of Father John Raniak soon gripped the region and became one of the era's most haunting unsolved mysteries. John Raniak was not the kind of man anyone expected to vanish. At 28, he was a beloved priest in the small town of Virden, Illinois. Born in 1895 to Slovak immigrants, John grew up in a devout family and felt an early calling to the church. He was ordained in 1917 and assigned to Virden's Sacred Heart Catholic Church, where he quickly became a pillar of the community. He was cheerful, energetic, and devoted to his parishioners. He lived with his mother and siblings and spent his days ministering to families and organizing community events. By 1923, Father John seemed happy and settled, and nothing in his life hinted at the possibility that he would simply disappear. Monday, March 5th, 1923, began as a routine day for Father Raniak. He set out on the 85-mile drive from Virden to St. Louis to purchase supplies for a church bazaar. He often combined such errands with visits to friends, and that day he hoped to see Father Vincent Linek, a close pal serving at a St. Louis parish. John left Virden in the morning driving his gray Buick. He arrived in St. Louis before noon and stopped at Father Linek's home, but his friend wasn't there. John left a note and proceeded downtown to do his shopping. Witnesses later recalled seeing the young priest calmly buying goods in the afternoon, around 2:30 p.m. Once he'd completed his errands, he headed back toward Illinois. planning to be home that night as promised. We know Father John made it part way. In Venice, Illinois, just across the river from St. Louis, a mechanic reported that John stopped at his garage for a quick car repair early that evening. The priest continued on his way after the fix, but that brief encounter in Venice was the last time anyone saw Father Raniak. When Father John did not return home on Monday night, worry began to spread in Virden. It was unlike him to be out of contact, and by Tuesday morning, his family and parishioners were anxious. Phone calls to friends and neighboring parishes turned up no sign of him. On Wednesday, March 7th, a group of concerned Virden residents traveled to St. Louis to report the priest missing and help search. Only then did a crucial clue emerge, and the police realized that they had already found Father John's car before anyone knew he was missing. Inside the vehicle, investigators found disturbing signs. Papers belonging to the priest were scattered on the front seat, as if someone had rifled through them or there had been a struggle. One was a bill for a film ironically titled The Victim. More chilling was what someone had left in the back seat area of the vehicle. Scratched into the paint were the words, "We won." These two words, gouged in 6-inch letters, felt like a cruel taunt from whoever had taken Father John. Police also noticed mud and bits of cornstalk clinging to the undercarriage, suggesting the car had been driven off-road into farm fields. And tellingly, the St. Christopher medal that John kept in his car, a patron saint charm for safe travel, was missing, its clasp pried empty. It seemed clear that somewhere after leaving St. Louis, the priest had met with foul play. The mystery of the missing priest captured headlines, and law enforcement from Missouri and Illinois mobilized. Search parties scoured the roadsides and woods along Father John's route. Volunteers dragged the river shallows and checked every ditch, well, and ravine where a body might be. But aside from the ominous clues in the car, nothing was found. Father John had vanished without a trace. With publicity came a flood of tips and a fair share of false leads. In early April, a St. Louis newspaper published a sensational claim that Father Raniak had been living a double life as an armed robber. Unsurprisingly, no evidence ever turned up to indicate that this mild-mannered priest had turned to banditry. Another tip, a telegram demanding a ransom and claiming the priest would be returned safely, also turned out to be a hoax. In the absence of answers, theories swirled. One idea was that Father John might have disappeared by choice, abandoning his clerical life. Those who knew him vehemently rejected this, and he had given no indication of despair or desire to leave. Suspects were investigated, but no evidence turned up in relation to any of them. The most ominous suspect was a man named Andrew Rolando. Rolando was a fugitive who was known for what was euphemistically called at the time anti-Catholic sentiment. And by anti-Catholic sentiment, I'm underselling what he did here in a massive way. He was already wanted for slaying a priest in another state in 1921. It was easy to imagine that this dangerous man might have crossed paths with Father Raniak on that fateful evening. Yet, like all other leads, nothing definitive came of it, and Rolando was never caught or questioned in connection with the case, and there was no hard proof he was involved. That said, he was confirmed to be in the area at the time. Despite the incredible passage of time, there is faint hope that this case will one day be solved. Father Raniak's remains may have been found years ago, and he may be known in some other context as a John Doe, just waiting to have his name returned to him. Genetic genealogy may one day be able to prove this priest is one of the nation's innumerable John Does just waiting to be identified. A remote Japanese island, a lonely hike up a volcano, and then nothing, ever again. In April 2009, American poet Craig Arnold disappeared while exploring Kuchino Arabujima, a tiny volcanic island in the south of Japan. The 41-year-old Arnold, a professor and adventurer, vanished, leaving behind only a trail of footprints and a mystery that endures to this day. To understand how Craig Arnold came to be on that far-flung island, it's important to first know who he was. He was widely regarded as an incredibly gifted poet and had won a number of awards for his work, including the extremely prestigious Fulbright Scholarship. By 2009, Arnold was a respected professor at the University of Wyoming and a well-known figure in poetry and intellectual circles. Arnold also had a spirit for adventure. He was a self-proclaimed volcano enthusiast, drawn to extreme places where others seldom go. He had traveled the world visiting active volcanoes and turning those experiences into poems and essays. By early 2009, he embarked on his most ambitious voyage yet, a 5-month fellowship in Japan to write about the nation's volcanoes. As he journeyed through the Japanese archipelago, he chronicled his impressions on a blog entitled Volcano Pilgrim, 5 Months in Japan as a Wandering Poet. On this trip, Arnold's fascination with nature's raw power was on full display. The day before his disappearance, he mused in his blog about how the rush of imminent danger can sharpen one's perspective on life. In hindsight, those words felt eerily prophetic. One of his friends later noted that Arnold, despite his experience, could become so engrossed in exploration that he might lose track of his surroundings. In late April 2009, Arnold traveled to Kuchino Arabujima, a remote, sparsely populated island dominated by an active volcano. On April 27th, he set out alone from his inn to hike up Mount Shindake, the island's active volcano, presumably eager to explore its steaming craters and panoramic views. The terrain on the island was perilous, with dense vegetation, unofficial trails, and hidden cliffs, making it easy to lose one's way, or worse. When Arnold didn't return that evening, concern quickly grew. The next day, Japanese authorities launched a search mission. By law, official search and rescue operations in Japan typically last only 3 days. Rescuers combed the woods and slopes using dogs and even a helicopter. The island's dense bamboo thickets made the search arduous, and after 3 days there was still no sign of the missing poet. His cell phone remained unreachable, and attempts to ping its GPS signal via his Japanese provider also proved fruitless. With no success in the initial sweep, Arnold's family and friends refused to give up. After the official efforts wound down, Arnold's family enlisted the help of an international search and rescue team. Eventually, they discovered a faint trail potentially left by Arnold, leading toward a steep, hazardous cliff high on the volcano. Signs in the disturbed soil and foliage suggested that he had slipped near the edge, possibly after sustaining a leg injury that impeded his balance. The evidence pointed to a tragic conclusion. Arnold had fallen from a great height and almost certainly did not survive. Still, the story of Craig Arnold's disappearance leaves a lingering aura of mystery. The official conclusion is clear. He met with a fatal accident on the volcano. Others have floated more unlikely theories, from foul play to an intentional disappearance, but no evidence has ever emerged to support any scenario other than a tragic accident. Ultimately, the consensus aligns with the simplest explanation. Craig Arnold's final adventure turned out to be far more dangerous than he anticipated, leading to an untimely end. On June 2, 2015, a routine rafting expedition through the Grand Canyon turned into a baffling mystery. Morgan Heimer, a 22-year-old river guide from Cody, Wyoming, was leading a commercial rafting trip along the Colorado River. Heimer was an experienced outdoorsman, a strong swimmer, and a seasoned guide familiar with the canyon's perils. That afternoon, day 6 of an 8-day trip, the group stopped near a landmark called Pumpkin Springs at River Mile 213 for a side hike and some cliff jumping fun. As clients took turns leaping from a low rock ledge into the water, Heimer assisted them, ensuring everyone's safety. Once the last client had jumped, Heimer mentioned to the lead guide that he was going to take a short break while they prepared to head back to the boats. The lead guide stepped away briefly to speak with a guest, but when he turned around, Morgan was nowhere to be seen. At first, no one panicked, and it was assumed that Heimer had simply wandered off for a moment of solitude or to relax out of the sun. He was last observed at approximately 4 p.m., standing on that riverside ledge with his guide gear on, including a life vest. He was also carrying a distinctive purple water bottle, which the park officials hoped would be a significant clue going forward. There was no splash, no cry for help, no obvious sign of an accident. One moment he was part of the group, and the next he had vanished almost into thin air. Hours passed with the team assuming their guide would reappear after his break. It wasn't until around 7 p.m., when Morgan failed to show up at camp for dinner, that serious concern set in. The other party members searched the immediate area, calling out his name and scanning the river's edge, but there was no trace of Morgan. As dusk fell with still no sign of the young guide, the group realized something was very wrong and placed a satellite phone call to park authorities to report him missing. Early the next morning, Grand Canyon National Park rangers launched a major search and rescue operation. A helicopter crew flew to the area at first light on June 3rd, inserting rangers near the spot where Morgan was last seen. 3 ground teams fanned out along the rocky banks, while a boat team scoured the river. Searchers faced grueling conditions and the summer heat was extremely intense. Despite these challenges, they combed diligently through an extensive area, covering roughly a 14-mile stretch of river and about 4 miles of adjacent land around Pumpkin Springs. They looked for any clue: a piece of clothing, footprints, his purple water bottle, or the dark life vest that might have been caught on rocks or river debris. When initial sweeps found nothing, the search radius was expanded westward downriver toward the Diamond Creek takeout. This is a popular exit point for rafting trips about 12 miles beyond where Morgan disappeared. The idea was to ensure that if he had been carried downstream, no stretch of riverbank would be left uninspected. Interviews were conducted with everyone on the trip, and even with other river groups who had been in the area, in case someone had seen something that might help explain what happened. But day after day, the canyon yielded no secrets. There were no signs of a struggle or an animal encounter, and no evidence that Heimer had attempted to hike out of the canyon on foot. By June 8th, after 6 full days of intensive searching by air, water, and land, not a single clue to Morgan's fate had turned up. With heavy hearts, officials made the difficult decision to scale back the operation. The search was transitioned to a limited mode, meaning rangers and pilots would keep an eye out for any telltale signs during routine patrols, but the large-scale hunt was suspended. Morgan Heimer's disappearance left both investigators and loved ones grasping for answers. Here was a capable guide, intimately familiar with the dangers of the river, equipped with a life jacket and survival knowledge. Yet he had vanished without leaving even a footprint behind. In the immediate aftermath, the working theory was that Morgan must have somehow fallen into the Colorado River and drowned, his body likely swept away by the strong current. This theory made sense to many. The river was swift and powerful, and even with a personal flotation device, an accident in certain rapids or whirlpools could pin a person underwater. If he was caught in an underwater crevice or entangled in debris, his remains might not surface for a long time, if ever. Rescuers noted that given Morgan's skills and fitness, they initially believed he would be easy to find, which made the complete lack of results even more troubling. As days passed with no sign of him, the presumption of a fatal water accident grew stronger, simply because no other scenario had any supporting evidence. In the absence of answers, several theories persist among those who follow the case. The prevailing theory remains that Morgan fell into the Colorado River and succumbed to a tragic accident. Perhaps he lost his footing on the wet rock, or got too close to the edge, and the river's swift current did the rest. If so, the Colorado may have carried him far downstream, or pinned him in a submerged pocket, explaining why extensive searches failed to recover a body or even a piece of gear. Another theory, harder to reconcile with Morgan's expertise, is that he ventured briefly into the wild and got fatally lost or injured. Did he step inland for just a moment to find a private spot or to take in the view, and then suffer a fall in the labyrinth of cliffs and crevices set back from the water's edge? The area is remote and unforgiving. Even a short walk away from the group could turn treacherous if one slips into a hidden ravine or encounters an unseen hazard. Yet, considering Morgan's familiarity with wilderness terrain, this makes this more unlikely. After all, he was acutely aware of such dangers, much more so than the average person. Moreover, the intensive land search found no trace of him in the surrounding quarter-mile radius of the canyon, where such an accident would likely occur. This theory, while not completely impossible, leaves many park officials skeptical, given the lack of any supporting evidence. Other more sinister activities have also been suggested, from foul play to potential supernatural explanations. However, neither of these theories have any evidence to back them up, and they remain highly speculative. Today, nearly a decade later, the disappearance of Morgan Heimer remains an open case and an enduring heartbreak for his family, friends, and the tight-knit river guide community. The National Park Service keeps Morgan on their list of cold cases, and the investigation remains officially ongoing in a limited capacity.